Hi, and welcome to today's webinar. The topic is about migrating from your EAGLE files over to Fusion 360. My name is Ed Robledo. I'm part of the tech marketing team and been working with EAGLE for approximately the past 20 plus years. And today we're going to tell you all about taking those files that you've had, those libraries, as well as your design files over to Fusion 360. And with me today is joining us is Jorge Garcia. Many of you have seen him on our forums, quite active in our forums. And so Jorge is our community manager here in Autodesk, specializing all things electronics. Been working with EAGLE for way over 10 years by now, Jorge, right?
Yep.
You've been with us over 10 years.
Amazing.
Got his bachelor's over in electronic engineering at FIU, which here in Miami, and he really likes electronics, and believe me, he does. You should see his desk sometimes. It's pretty impressive. And anything that has to do with power control applications. And he has a really special space in his heart for embedded systems as well as programming, even though he still considers himself kind of a novice at it both. But I'll be honest with you, I've seen some of your work, Jorge, so it's quite impressive. So thank you, Jorge, for joining us. I greatly appreciate it, man. So, you know, we have a pretty aggressive agendas for today's presentation, and which let me just go over it really quick. So today we're going to do a little overview of EAGLE for those of you that may have not worked with EAGLE in the past. We just want to do an overview of it and give you a brief explanation of the different workspaces available, the schematic, the PCB, and I'm going to show you a little bit of how the push and pull between EAGLE and Fusion 360 works and some of the limitations that we currently have. Then Jorge is going to give us a presentation on the Fusion 360 user interface, how all that comes together. Also, we're going to try to explain to you, those EAGLE users, you may be used to the EAGLE control panel as you could organize your projects. Well, with the electronic document, it works kind of almost the same with Fusion 360, and also it keeps track of how is that your files, your schematic and your design files and your PCBs actually keep consistency. Now, one big question about this, Jorge, is about libraries, and this is maybe one of the most important parts of everything, is how are you going to handle your library management? How am I going to access my EAGLE libraries? How am I going to upload my EAGLE libraries? How am I going to access my libraries? I may already have libraries which I've already managed and have 3D models assigned to them. How is that going to work with that in Fusion? And we're going to answer those questions today. Now, another strong topic is about your user language programs. Those of us usually refer to them as UOPs. As you know, it lets you customize your EAGLE in exporting, importing file formats, your script files. And we're going to talk a little bit about the CAM processor. And also, I forgot to mention here, but we're going to talk a little bit about those DRU files, you know, your design rule files that are 100% compatible with Fusion 360. Any DRU files that you've downloaded from any board house are going to be 100% compatible with Fusion 360. We're going to show you how to load that. So, so let's go ahead and start with our presentation today. As you know, the EAGLE is basically a collection of editors which work together. So we have our control panel, which is the way you're going to be organizing all of your projects, your libraries, your scripts, your UOPs. Then we have our schematic editor, which, as you already know, has spice simulation capabilities, but the most important part is that it keeps track of the PCB editor. They work in conjunction. And last but not least, we have our library editor. The library editor does have our IPC compliant calculator as well, which we hope to show you a little bit about that in a future webinar. And also, it does give you access to any managed libraries. It lets you create managed libraries in EAGLE, which are accessible through Fusion 360. Now, in the user interface in EAGLE, you will remember that it's kind of like a collection of icons on the left-hand side as well as top, and you could have some text commands anywhere around the interface as well. So we're going to show you kind of how is that we work with the toolbars in Fusion 360. That way you feel comfortable in adopting Fusion when you start uploading and accessing your files as well. Now, let's go ahead and first, what is the most important part when you're migrating your design files in Fusion 360? And Jorge, I'm pretty sure you agree with me, is like if I upload my files over to Fusion 360, does it keep consistency? How can I be guaranteed that it's going to keep consistency? Well, it does, because Fusion 360 is 100% compatible with EAGLE files. So once you create your electronic document, now here's the key. You need to create that electronic document first, then you're going to go ahead and reference the board, reference the schematic, and run your ERC to make sure that you have that consistency. And it actually does work. I have not worked with any design myself, or if users have provided us their designs for support purposes, that I've lost consistency so far. So once I load them, I've been working so far. So it works really well. But now, here's the special part. Now, I'm able to reference EAGLE schematics, which are 100% compatible, but I could actually use that same schematic and reference other PCBs. That's the nice flexibility that we have using Fusion 360, which is a little bit different than the way it works with EAGLE. So if I have one schematic and I have different boards that I want to use for referencing, let's say a smartwatch, you may have different sizes of a smartwatch, but the technology is the same. I could actually use the same schematic, but reference different PCBs, which is kind of nice about that. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Fusion 360 electronic document. Well, now the next important question we have, Jorge, is often like, I have a lifetime of work on UOPs and script files because I've made it as customizable as possible. So today we're going to talk a little bit about those user language programs that you have and the ones that we have that are included with Fusion 360. And the majority of them, they're going to work. You shouldn't have any problems. So all those UOPs that you worked on so hard, they will work in Fusion 360. All those script files that you work with, they will work. Now remember, Fusion 360 is a cloud-based application. Therefore, we have created a local drive, a local path on your local computer. That way Fusion 360 can access them, because remember, Fusion is cloud-based, so we made provisions for you to be able to address that and access them. Now, and let's see.
Yeah, and along those lines, it's similar to how it was in EAGLE. Basically, in documents, you have a folder called Fusion 360, and inside that Fusion 360 folder, you'll find folders for your custom scripts, for your custom UOPs, and Fusion 360, when you're working in electronics, gives that path as an option whenever you're going to run scripts in UOP. So it becomes a very similar experience to what you're already used to.
Exactly. Very well. Now, let's talk about another important topic here, Jorge, about electromechanical workflows. Now, many of you already know that you have that fly menu, in which allows you to push and pull data between Fusion 360 and EAGLE. Okay, now, when you push your PCB design over to Fusion 360, you do get a really nice 3D model of your PCB, but it's kind of limited because it's canvas based. In other words, all the components are movable, but when it comes to the actual vias and your traces, those are just a canvas. It's like taking a picture. They're not really functional. Okay, so that's one of the kind of the biggest changes that we have if you by adopting Fusion 360 as your program, because when you're moving between the 3D PCB and the 2D PCB within the Fusion 360 platform, each via, each trace, each pad is actually independent extruded bodies in which they have materials assigned to them. Therefore, we could do really nice e-cooling analysis on them as well, which is a topic for another webinar that we'll be addressing. Now, last but not least, because I want to move on this, because I really want to cover more about the user experience and going live with our demo. So last but not least, we're going to talk a little bit about library and library management. Well, here the topic is going to be a little bit more extensive. So in Fusion 360, we have in that platform, we could handle all the libraries, your local libraries. When I mean local within the Fusion, in the Fusion platform, in the what we call local, but it's cloud-based. Okay, so Fusion provides you all of the tools necessary to be able to share your local projects that you have in Fusion 360. And as many of you already are aware, with Eagle, you have your local libraries, okay, which are on your hard drive. And if you want to share them, you could manage that library. But other than, yes, only managing the library to make it shareable, it extends its capability of assigning 3D models to it. Now, how is that I handle my libraries between Eagle and Fusion? Because I spend a lot of time with my libraries in Eagle and I want to be able to use them in Fusion. How do I go about that? And today we're going to be answering some of those questions as well. We'll be addressing that as well, okay? So, this is the part I just wanted to give you an introduction on what we plan to be covering today. So Jorge is going to be sharing his screen and showing us a little bit more of how do we go about this. So I'll let Jorge take over, and I guess he's going to be switching over to Fusion 360, so just give him a few minutes to set it up. Thank you.
So here we're in Fusion 360, and the first thing we want to highlight, as Ed was mentioning, if you're coming from Eagle, you no longer have the control panel, but you do have a data panel. And this is going to be the mechanism that you use to organize your projects. Now, the first thing I want to highlight here, if we go to the home view, is you have a team hub. Now, every user has a team hub assigned to them by default. You have an individual team hub. This is where you're going to store your projects, your work. You can share assets with others. You can invite people into your team hub, and you can create new hubs. So you have a lot of flexibility here as far as how you can collaborate with others. But by default, everyone will have their own personal team hub of which they're the only member. From there, you can create more hubs or you can invite people to your personal hub. Now, one thing you're going to notice here is in dealing with the hub workflow, we're recommending that you create a project called libraries. And any libraries that you create within Fusion should be saved in that centralized location. Because everything is on the cloud, it's easy for projects to reference other projects, so you don't have to worry about storing the library with the project. And by keeping everything in one place, you always have an immediate view of what you have available, what you've created. So this is something that we're going to recommend, that you create a project called libraries, and any libraries you create within Fusion, you store in this project. Now you'll notice I've pinned it. That makes sure it's always at the top. You can unpin it and then it'll go through alphabetical order. Now the other thing you'll notice here is there's a trash folder, and this can be really handy once you decide you want to clean up maybe old projects that you're not using anymore or information that you want to get rid of. Sometimes the easiest thing to do is just move it to the trash project. So those are two things that we're going to recommend you coming in as a new Fusion user from Eagle. This libraries project is going to give you the familiar feel of the libraries tree and the control panel. And then trash is just going to make things easy to keep clean when you're working. So those are two things that we're recommending. In regards to, like Ed was mentioning in the presentation, your UOPs, your scripts, all of that, we've set up a folder in documents called Fusion 360. Inside that folder, you can store those assets, and when you go to use them, those paths will be available to you. Now, the most common question now is, okay, how do I bring in my Eagle, one of my Eagle designs into Fusion? So what you're going to do very simply is you create a new project. So new project, I'll call it transition. Okay, and now it'll be organized alphabetically. Can go into it. Now over here, I'm going to go File, New Electronics Design. Now this is something that's very different to what you're used to in Eagle. In Eagle, the control panel helps you keep the schematic and the board organized. Within Eagle, as long as the schematic and the board were in the same directory and they had the same name, they would automatically track. Because Fusion is working with cloud data, those paradigms no longer work. So in order to compensate for that and augment, we created the electronics design document. Now, if you notice, when you create a new electronics design document, you have the option to create a brand new schematic and a brand new board. And this would obviously be within the Fusion environment. Now, if you want to bring in an old Eagle design into Fusion, you just click first, reference to a schematic document. So we click here. Now, we can obviously reference any designs that we have as projects in our hub, but we go over here, select from my computer, and then I can go into my Eagle folder, and I can select a project to bring in. So I'll go into my projects folder, I'll pick, let's say this one.
That Wi-Fi radio was a good one. I remember that well.
That was a good one.
That was a good one.
So say open. Okay, and that brings in the schematic. Now I need to bring in the board. So I go back to the electronics design document. I select reference. I go from my computer, and now I select again the cape. Say open, and now you'll see it come in. Now once you have it in, check it out, the old CAD soft. This is an old school. This is what an Eagle user who maybe has a really old project as their company was growing and they have old logos and stuff like that, they might see something like this going on. So if you go over to the electronics document, what you're going to see is now those two files have been associated. So now we're just going to save. It's going to by default go into whatever project is open, which is transition. I'll give it a name. I'll call it transition design. And I'll hit save. And what you're going to notice is that the electronics document is going to save, and then the schematic and the board are also going to save. So our recommendation when you're working in Fusion 360 is initiate the save from the electronics document, and then it will waterfall to the any other documents that are linked. Okay, this document is also going to be responsible for linking your 3D model of your PCB.
So Jorge, you created the project, and in the project you created the electronic document, and then from the electronic document you've referenced that schematic, and then you reference that board in the same electronic document. So what's going to happen now is that that board and that schematic are going to be associated. Is that going to control now that the board and the schematic now kind of keep annotation between them now from this point on?
Correct. This is going to be the glue that holds them together. Now, a very natural question that may come up, especially if you have a long history with Eagle, is why do it this way? Why add this extra step of creating the electronics document and having to link the schematic and having to link the board? And the answer is very simple. As you know from Eagle, the relationship between a schematic and a board is only and can only ever be one-to-one. One schematic to one board. That's always the case with Eagle. With the creation of this new electronic design document, we're setting up the groundwork for being able to one day have a many-to-many relationship. So imagine having multiple schematics that now reference a single board, or vice versa. Multiple boards that end up referencing a single schematic. And this is actually more akin to the natural way we work. We'll take a part of the design, we'll prototype that, make sure it works, then we'll move on to the other. And at the end, we try to put everything together. By having this workflow where you can have a many-to-many relationship, that's going to make the files behave in a more natural way, because you can take your CPU schematic, you can take your controller schematic, and have those then become a single board.
So you have that flexibility now to be able to repurpose it on
Correct.
different designs. Okay, cool. Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jorge.
Yeah, so that's the end game. That's what we're working towards.
Okay.
So this additional step now lays the groundwork for in the future having more flexibility.
Excellent.
Okay, so at this point, as an Eagle user, you can just continue to work like normal. So you go into your schematic, you keep the schematic and the board always open together. If I have lots of different little tabs open, but we'll be able to see why in a second. So you have, if you notice, all the commands that you're used to from Eagle are here. You have your net command, you have name, you have your label, everything is here. It's just arranged differently. So in that regard, the learning curve is really just going to be limited to you learning where everything is, but everything operates in a similar manner. So you notice you have the feedback on the commands down here. So it'll tell you, if you select a command, it'll let you give you instructions about said command. And that applies on the board as well. But from the point of view of you as an EAGLE user, everything pretty much behaves the same way, except the new features in the board, which we'll talk about right now.
I see it has the tabs on the top, and then the whatever tab you have active, that will bring that set of that dialog box associated to that tab then.
Correct. The commands will change, but everything you're used to is here. So what you're going to notice, a couple of hints to make it easier to navigate the way the commands are set up in Fusion, is that Fusion tries to set up the menus following a workflow. So from the left, at the leftmost point, it's the beginning of the workflow, the most fundamental operations. And as you move towards the right, you're progressing in the workflow. So if you notice, we usually route before we do any rework. And that's the way it's structured. So you can kind of get an idea of how the commands flow and what step in the layout process you're in as you move from left to right on the command bar. Now we have these menus. They contain additional functionality. Most of them are pretty self-explanatory. So like here, you just have the rules in the DRC. Manufacturing is all the CAM related stuff. Automation is your scripts and UOPs.
Let's talk a little bit about those scripts and ULPs, Jorge. What do you think? So I wanted to find out more about those scripts and the ULPs and their compatibility in Fusion 360. Could you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yeah. So if you click on Run UOP, you're going to find that you have a list of pretty much all the UOPs that were included in EAGLE. There's a few that have actually been replaced. But for the most part, every UOP you ever used in EAGLE is available here. Now, when it comes to the ones you personally create, the key thing to be aware of is if the UOP creates a file while it's running, if it has to create a file, let's say the UOP creates a script file, those may require some rework in order to run in Fusion, because remember that the UOPs in EAGLE generally assumed that if they were writing a file, they were writing it to whatever directory the project is in. In Fusion, because technically your project is not in a directory, that assumption doesn't work and those UOPs need to be adjusted. But for the most part, you'll find that the majority of the UOPs will work without modification. Now, if we click over here where we can select the UOP directory, remember how I told you we've created this folder in Documents called Fusion 360, and under UOPs you can place the UOPs that you are used to using in EAGLE, and they become immediately available here.
So if I download somebody else's UOP or I write my own UOP, I would put it in my local Documents Fusion 360 UOP folder, and then I'll access it from this way.
Correct.
Okay, cool.
Okay, and then the same thing applies to the scripts. If I click on scripts, you're going to see that we have that same directory. Okay, so there's nothing you have to do as you transition to really rework your scripts or UOP. Scripts will always work because they're just a list of command line actions. In the case of UOPs, if your UOP created a file, created a script file, and saved it before it finished running, that will need some reworking because of the situation with your data. Now, one thing I didn't mention, and it may seem a little obvious, but it's subtle. When we reference, so remember that I hit reference a schematic document and reference a PCB document. When you do that, if you're selecting a document from your computer, it's actually being uploaded and then stored in the cloud. So these versions here are not local. These are not local versions of my design. These are the copies that were made on the cloud for Fusion to be able to work with the cloud data. So
if I make any changes in EAGLE onto the schematic, it's not gonna affect what I've done in Fusion at all because it's just totally independent.
Correct. And if you make any changes here, it's not going to backtrack because you're modifying independent sets of data. And that's going to be an important point once we start talking about the library.
Now, Jorge, you made a reference to this board and reference the schematic into electronic document. How do we check that we kept consistency? I mean, I see you have the command line, but what would be the correct way of making sure that my board and my schematic are consistent? And does Fusion 360 kind of keep consistency?
Excellent. Let's go ahead and answer that. So I'm going to leave memory lane for a second. Obviously, this design is like 6-7 years old.
It was a great project, though. I remember it well when you made that radius. It was a great project.
So what you'll do is the same thing you do in Eagle. Is you go to validate in the schematic, and you click ERC, and you'll get the message. Board and schematic are consistent. And when you immediately upload, you should always get board and schematic are consistent. That's always going to be the case because you haven't changed any data. It's simply been copied to the cloud, and now Fusion is working with it. Okay?
Got it. So the recommendation is once you reference a board, reference a schematic, run ERC. It's the first thing you should do. Okay.
Yeah, just as a sanity check.
Okay.
You shouldn't get any surprises, but like many things, when we start something new, we have a little bit more concern. We're a little bit more unsure. This is like a nice, sanity check, letting you know that everything's okay.
I notice you have the command line there, so I could just run ERC there, or just like a lot of us, we work with our left hand on the keyboard and the other one on the mouse, so we could just continue working the same way then, as always.
Correct. And that brings us to a good point, which is how the shortcuts work in Fusion, because they do work differently than how Eagle did. In Eagle, you could use the assign command, and you would define these combination shortcuts. You would have a modifier and usually a letter, and you would assign a command to it. In Fusion 360, you'll find that most of the commands have shortcuts already defined to them, and these are single key shortcuts. So for example, the add command is an A, move is an M, under the connect, net is R, etc., etc. Now you may be saying, well, hey, I like having the ability to define my own shortcuts. And for that, we have the S menu. So if you press the S key, this is going to bring up what's known as the shortcut menu. And you can add commands to this. So I've added the net and the move command, and they are specific to whatever editor you're in. So in the schematic, you have this set of shortcuts that you've defined. In the board, you can have a different set. So in my case, I have the route command, but if I wanted to add, for example, polygon, I could, pick here polygon pour, and you'll see this little add to shortcuts, and there it is. And I can add any command. If I want to show them all, I put that in, and like that. And you can populate this menu as much as you want, and you can, obviously, it can be as big or as small as you want it to be. So that's going to be very powerful.
Excellent. Jorge, but we've talked quite a bit with schematics and boards and so forth. Now, I have a lifetime worth of libraries in Eagle, local and manage. Many of you, if you don't understand what managed libraries is basically, it was the method by which when we started collaborating with Fusion 360, we would create managed libraries. That way we could assign 3D models to them. And then it got extended to being able to share my libraries with other Eagle users. Now, so, I've invested a lot of time on this. So can we talk a little bit about the libraries, Jorge, please?
Let's do that. That's a very important aspect. So I'm going to go back to the data panel. And like I mentioned, we're recommending that you create a project called libraries. And if I go in here, now this was like just some trash project that I had in a demo here, but what you would normally have is just all your libraries here. And then within this project, we're recommending that you create a folder and have all your 3D models in there. That way you have a nice organizational separation between the 3D models and the libraries themselves. And
so these 3D models would be like step files and maybe Fusion F3D files is what you mean, right? Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
So what I want to show you guys here with the libraries, remember how we mentioned that when you upload the schematic and the board, that data gets copied to the cloud, and that's the data that Fusion works with. In other words, your old local copy, that's not being touched at all by Fusion. So any changes in
So
Fusion.
what you mean is that when I upload my board and my schematic, it's no longer going to be referencing that library that I had locally, correct?
Correct.
Okay, cool. Okay.
So what you're going to find is when working with Eagle, we basically had two types of library. You had the local unmanaged library that had no 3D content in it whatsoever. And then you had your managed libraries, which would get uploaded to the cloud and were the mechanism through which you could have 3D content that Fusion could use. Okay? So if you have local unmanaged libraries in Eagle, your best bet to using them in Fusion is to use the upload button and just selecting your libraries and uploading them that way. This workflow, and I repeat, only applies to unmanaged libraries. So if you have libraries from like version 6 of Eagle, 5, etc., all of those, best way to deal with them in Fusion is to just directly upload them.
Could I do more than one at a time? Because I have tons of libraries. Could I do many of them?
Yeah, you could drag and drop as many as you wanted here.
Okay, cool.
That would work. Okay, but this workflow, like I mentioned, is only applies to unmanaged libraries. Okay, very important. So I reiterate, if they're unmanaged, you go through the upload. If they're managed, things become a little bit more involved. Okay,
Just different. It's just
different.
Different. Okay.
That's the right term, Ed. So let me show you what I mean. So I have this design, and if I right click on this switch,
Do you want to close the data panel there on the left? That way we have more
Yeah,
drawing
let's do
space
that.
there. Yeah.
So if you right click on, or actually let me left click first, you're going to notice that this is, and I know it, that this is my managed library from Eagle. When I created this design originally, it was an Eagle design.
So you have the panels. I see the design manager on the left hand side, the inspector, the way you have it all docked out. So you got your design manager, you have your inspector on the right hand side. Okay.
Okay, so let's say I want to edit this. I want to change this part. Okay, if I right click and I say open device, you're going to see that Fusion opens the managed library. Okay, now this library, I can see it, I can use assets from it, but this library is on library.io, which is the mechanism we've always used with Eagle. It's not a Fusion team library. So to clarify this further, to explain further, Fusion has one piece of cloud infrastructure, which we call Fusion Team. With Eagle, we have a different piece of cloud infrastructure, which we call library.io. The two systems are completely independent. Okay, so on their own, they don't interact with each other. So right here, if you notice, we have this little link symbol, which is letting me know this library is linked to a managed library. So if I make any changes right now and I hit save, what's going to happen is that Fusion is going to take this library and save a copy of it in the Fusion team infrastructure. So what you'll end up doing is you'll end up having two copies if you're not aware of what's going on.
Okay, Jorge, let me step through this real quick.
Yeah.
So you opened up that component, which automatically, since it was referencing a managed library made in Eagle, it's accessing all my managed libraries. I don't have to do anything to access those managed libraries. It's automatic.
Correct.
Okay. So I didn't have to do anything. I only had to do things with my local libraries. Okay. So I didn't have to touch anything on my managed library at all. So I right click and I selected I'm going to edit the device, and it automatically fetched into my library and my managed libraries, which are stored in library.io, and it opened it. So now I'm in the edit mode of that library. And by that symbol that you're showing me up on top there on the left hand side, is showing me that that library is a managed library. Okay, so let me know it's a link to a library.io managed library. Okay, now if I edit it in Fusion 360, could you tell me one more time? So if I make modifications to this part, what happens?
So if you make modifications to this part, okay, if you make a change and you just hit save, okay, what's going to happen is, I'll just show it. I'll hit save, and it's going to say, where do you want to save it? And what it's going to do is it's going to create a copy of this library in Fusion Team, in the Fusion Team infrastructure. So you're not editing. What's going to happen is it's going to create a second copy. You're not going to be directly touching the original managed library if you do this. So you're going to, if you're not careful and you make a change here and you hit save, you might leave thinking, oh, I changed it in my managed library so it's accessible to Eagle. It won't be.
So if I go over to Eagle and I access my library, I won't see the change.
You will not see the change because the two systems are independent.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Okay. So what do you need to do if you do want to have the link, if you do want this to affect?
In other words, if I make changes in Fusion, I want my Eagle team to be able to see it. How do I go about that?
So the best approach is to go over here to manage and you say push a new version. If you do this, because of the intelligence that's already built into Fusion, what it will do is it will create a copy on Fusion Team like before, but it will link it to the managed library in Eagle. So what you'll have is you'll have two libraries that are linked to each other and that you can push and pull from. So the Eagle users on your team will be able to see any new changes you make, and if they make any changes, you'll be able to bring that in.
So if we're a team of engineers, right, and some of us just like Eagle, we continue to work with Eagle. Some of us are adopting the Fusion 360, but we're sharing the same pool of libraries, right? Mm-hmm. So as a Fusion guy, I could edit the library, but I got to make sure that I push it. It's two separate libraries, but they're linked. That way, if I make modifications and I push it to a new version, just like you do in Eagle, the Eagle guys are going to be able to see the changes. Is that correct?
Correct.
But how about if the Eagle guys make changes? What's going on now?
Then you pull.
Okay. So when I open up the library, I got to pull then?
Correct.
Is it going to give me a notification letting me it's time to pull or something like that?
Yeah, you'll see actually like a little arrow letting you know that, hey, stuff is new. And you'll actually get a banner also. It'll let you know that you have changes in the managed library to pull them in.
Okay, cool.
Okay. So this is the part where you have to be very clear when you're interacting with managed libraries that are in library.io. If you're purely in Fusion, if for example you're not trying to transfer anything back to Eagle, you're not, you just want to stay completely in Fusion, then your library is going to be like this one. You're going to see that it has this little logo. This library is stored in Fusion Team. So any libraries you create in Fusion from scratch, those libraries live only on the Fusion Team infrastructure. They by default have no duplication on the library.io infrastructure.
How do I go about sharing this library though, Jorge?
So if you want to share it, you click on Manage, and you can say create a new managed library in library.io.
So now when I do that, the Eagle guys will be able to access this library then?
Correct.
Now, how about if I only want to share it with the guys using Fusion, or let's say my whole team is using Fusion, and I only want to share this library with all my other Fusion guys. How do I go about that?
So in that situation, what you end up doing is you go to data panel, and you see that you have this libraries project. You can go to people, and you can invite people to access your libraries. And you have complete control over them. You can give them editor status, read-only status, you can kick them out. You have complete control over who has access to this data. Okay? So when you invite them to the libraries folder, to the libraries project, they'll have access to everything, to all of your libraries.
So yeah, they're going to have access to everything that is in that project then.
Correct. Now, one final thing I want to mention. If you intend to have, the full workflow being able to go back to Eagle, what you want to see and how you'll know that everything is working correctly is after I create this new managed library, I'm going to create it. I'm going to say I want it there in that design con. I'll say create. Say OK. Yeah, I saved it. this is what you want to see. You want to see that your Fusion team library is linked to a managed library. This is how you know that you have that workflow completely set up correctly. You have the Fusion library that can now communicate with library.io. Because remember,
two separate libraries, but they're linked.
They're linked.
Okay. Okay.
And that's the key. That's the key to
They
understand.
reference each other. Okay, very well. Okay.
Correct. So changes in one can be pushed to the other and can be pulled from the other.
Okay.
And at any point you can choose to unlink if you wish. Okay? But that's really the key thing to understand. Fusion Team is a completely separate cloud infrastructure, which is what powers all of Fusion's data management. Library.io is its own cloud infrastructure, and that's what powers the interaction with Eagle and Fusion 360. So two separate environments. They need to have their own copies if you're going to edit stuff, and you need to link them if you intend to have forward and backward workflows.
And as a last question, because I think we've gone kind of long here, Jorge, but let's say I have a library that I've created in Fusion, so it's a Fusion team library, and my team, we're sharing a managed library. We have a library that we would like to merge it because we don't want to work with two libraries because they're related. Let's say they're one manufacturer, TI, and I have one version they have, and now we would like to link them both. Is it possible to kind of combine them into one?
It is. By using the link to managed library on library.io, you can form a link to the existing managed library. You can then pull in all those changes to consolidate them, and then from Fusion, push a new version, and now everybody's on the same level.
So I would open up that library that I have locally, and then I would link this library, which I would select the managed library. It would combine them, and then I would push a new version. Now everything is combined.
Correct. Correct.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, if there's components that have been repeated, it's going to give us the choice of which one we want to keep and things like that.
Correct.
It's going to prompt us. It will prompt us for it. Okay.
Correct. It'll prompt us on how to consolidate them.
Well, I think we've covered almost all of the major areas of concern when migrating from Fusion. Migrating from Eagle over to Fusion 360. So I don't think we have any. Let's go ahead and maybe go over to a Q&A session, maybe, Jorge? Or was there anything else that you wanted to cover at this moment?
No, that's everything I think we should cover for today. I'm going to go ahead and put back our Q&A slide.